to Beatrice, darling, dearest, dead.
I denne episoden av Portrettpodden.
We all know cruel people, don't we?
Yeah.
And we all know cruel people who enjoy being cruel. So I think I think the character of Count Olaf probably resembles the most people in the world.
Portrettpodden tilbake. Podcasten hvor jeg intervjuer mennesker som inspirerer meg, som får meg til å tenke, og som hjelper meg å forstå mer av verden jeg lever i. Mitt navn Mats Lasse-Jangås, og sammen med min gjest, den verdenskjente forfatteren Lemony Snicket, skal vi være stemmene i hodet ditt den nærmeste timen. Bøkene som til sammen utgir en serie uheldige hendelser, tok verden med storm da den første boka kom i 1999. De totalt 13 bøkene omhandler skjebnen til de 3 foreldreløse Baudelaire-barna som mister foreldrene sine i en mistenkelig brann og blir etterlatt en stor formue. En formue som deres nye verge, den onde grev Olaf, gjerne vil ha klørn i. Siden utgivelsen har bøkene solgt over 60 millioner eksemplarer og blitt oversatt til over 40 språk. Som et usikkert barn som ofte ble mobbet og følte seg utenfor, var det en herlig følelse å kunne dykke ned i den fabelaktige verden Lemony Snicket hadde skapt. Og selv om bøkene og karakterene har fått en helt ny betydning nå i voksen alder, det fremdeles et univers jeg gjerne vender tilbake til. I løpet av denne episoden prater vi om en serie uheldige hendelser. Hans nye bok Poison for Breakfast, hans inspirasjoner og hvordan han arbeider som forfatter. Vi vier også en stor del av episoden til å prate om ville geiter og det mye undervurderte strengeinstrumentet cembalo. Det kommer til å gi mening etter hvert. Med det ønsker dere riktig god fornøyelse, og her Lemony Snicket. Today's guest is one of my greatest literary heroes, a man whose books and writing were pivotal in my falling in love with language. Pivotal, a word here which means of crucial importance. You may know him as Lemony Snicket, the author behind the world-renowned series of books, A Series of Unfortunate Events, as well as other joyous and gruesome stories for children and adults of all ages. His latest novel, Poison for Breakfast, recently came out to great acclaim, and I'm glad to say that Daniel Handler, being his real name, joins me today all the way from San Francisco. How are you today, sir?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
How is life in the US treating you?
How is life? Not too bad. San Francisco is fairly stable in the pandemic. So we feel lucky to be here for sure.
Yeah. And if I've done my research correct, I'm meeting a few years in New York City. You've spent at least most of your life in San Francisco.
Yeah, I grew up here, and I lived in New York for a little window, but I always wanted to come back here, and I don't think I'm going to end up anywhere else. Yeah.
What is it then about? Well, draw the curtain back a bit. I only have the most general knowledge of the US. I've never been outside of Europe, but what is it then about San Francisco that makes you fall in love with the city and always makes you want to come back?
I think the fact that it is about half city and about half kind of rural areas. So even within the city, there are many, not just parks, because parks sounds very manicured, but there are kind of wild places. There are a bunch of places where no one can build. And so there's all kinds of little forests and grassy hills and things like that. And I'm a big walker, so I like to walk to a place like that. I don't think I could ever live in a rural area for any extended period of time. I think I'm too addicted to bookstores and noodle shops and all the things. But I like being near. I like being near some wildness, some outdoors. So most mornings I swim in the San Francisco Bay. And most days I'm walking to one park or another. So I think that's the appeal. But also I grew up here, and so my family's here and my friends are here, and it's a place that feels very deeply like home to me.
Also, might be a mistake, but I seem to remember hearing something about there being goats in the city area as well?
There are goats. There are, I think, 3 herds of goats that go from park to park doing the work of trimming the grass. It's always startling to see. You'll just be walking or you'll drive and you'll go around a corner and suddenly a hill that you've seen a million times will be covered in goats. It's which you don't expect in a city. I don't think there's any other city of San Francisco size that has regular goats around.
Yeah. At least we don't have them here in Norway, so that would be a seldom sight. But I don't know if you smoke, but at least I think that for my sake, if I were suddenly to see a whole herd of goats, I would start to question what I've been smoking.
They don't look like a hallucination because they look so real. But I also don't wander around smoking hallucinogens. So I'm usually I can be pretty sure of my own eyes. But there's something, they actually look, there's something very concrete about them. You know, they don't look like a mystical creature or like some kind of blurry vision. They look like animals doing their thing. And that's, I think, what's surprising. I think if they looked prettier, I might think they were imaginary, but they don't look very pretty. And they're busy, they're working. They're employed goats. They're not lazy, unemployed goats. They have jobs and they're chewing very hard. And there's always a man or a woman watching after them. And that always seems like that would be a fun job to me. Yeah.
Sort of the American dream, working hard, grafting, going about your own business.
Right. They're American goats. They're earning their keep.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know, but I think particularly for someone who grows up in a city, you know, your vision of animals can be very romantic. Yeah. You know, you think, you know, but when you see real animals, whether you are at a farm or if you're just walking by a hill in San Francisco, you see, you know, they're smelly and messy and hairy and they're very, very physical. That's something that I like a lot about them. I didn't think I would be talking about the goats for so long today, but I'm glad that I am. I'm grateful to be reminded of them.
I'm glad to remind you. And I also had written down a sort of a quasi script of where I wanted the start of this conversation to go in case I got a bit nervous. I hadn't written down goats, but well, here we are.
That's right. Yeah. Well, if you expected them, they wouldn't fit into the goats that we're talking about. The goats, right. I never know where I'm going to see them. I won't see them for months, and then suddenly I'll see them.
Yeah.
There are a few other things like that in San Francisco, if you want to continue to talk about it. There's several flocks of parakeets, which are, you know, tropical birds. They're not native to California. They are pet birds that have escaped and over generations have reproduced. And what, if you're a real San Franciscan, you know, because everyone calls them the wild parrots of San Francisco, and they're not wild and they're not parrots. No. They're really feral parakeets. And so that's another, if you're a San Franciscan, everybody occasionally will suddenly you'll see a flock of them. You'll say, oh my God, what are parrots doing here? And then someone else will say, those are the wild parrots of San Francisco. And then a real San Franciscan will say, they're not wild and they're not parrots.
Noted. If I ever make it down to San Francisco, I'll keep that in the back of my mind.
That's right. You can pass as a local by saying they're not wild. Yeah.
Usually my strategy when I go to France, for example, I'll just mumble something that sounds French.
That's right. Or if you're just rude, then everyone will. Yeah. Well, in Paris,
of course. Yeah.
Outside of Paris is something else.
Yeah. Well, as I said in the introduction, you're also well known under another name, that being Lemony Snicket, and writing a series of unfortunate events, which I'm sure we'll get to during the course of this interview. But your latest novel, let's start with that one, Poison for Breakfast. I mer enn 20 år har Lemony Snicket ledet millioner av unge lesere gjennom en mystisk verden av forvirrende spørsmål og uheldige hendelser. Med denne siste boka, et kjærlighetsbrev til unge og gamle lesere om de lunefulle sidene av det virkelige liv, vil både mangeårige fans og nye lesere oppleve Snickets særegne stemme på en ny måte. Denne sanne historie, like sånn som Lemony Snicket selv, begynner med et forvirrende brev levert under døra. Du spiste gift til frokost. Gjennom en hel del underfundige ledetråder for å løse mysteriet om hans egen bortgang, tar Snicket oss med på en tankevekkende reise gjennom sine affeksjoner. Den riktige måten å tilberede et egg på. En forvirrende idé kalt tsim-tsum. Den sublime nytelsen av å svømme i åpent vann, og mye mer. En bok som anbefales til barn i alle aldre. How did that come about?
How did it come about? It came about from many things. One were some notes that I gathered for years when I was writing a series of unfortunate events and when I was writing all the wrong questions that had kind of philosophical asides by Lemony Snicket that never fit into the books I was writing. So I had these ideas on little index cards. And then my son, when he was younger and he was starting to read, when he was starting to choose his books for the first time, and he was very interested in nonfiction. And and maybe it's different in Norway, but in America, the nonfiction for children is not very good. It's either, the animals of Africa, or it's a biography of some admired figure. Mm-hmm. And it's not the kind of nonfiction that I prefer, which is kind of an author's thoughts about something. Mm. And so I was thinking about that too. I was thinking there's not nonfiction. It would be fun to write a Lemony Snicket kind of nonfiction book that's more about these issues. And then I had an unexpected bunch of free time. I thought I was going to spend this whole summer in Vancouver, Canada, where they were filming the Netflix adaptation of a series of unfortunate events.
Look away, look away, look away, look away. The show will wreck your evening, your whole life and your day. Every single episode is nothing but dismay, so look away, look away, look away.
They told me I was going to be there. I was all set to be there. I was going to rent a little place, and I had all the books I was going to bring and read in the evenings, which was ridiculous because it's like so hard to work on something like that. You work for hours, you don't read anything. But and then, as often happens with me and large entertainment corporations, they said, "Never mind, get out of here." And so I was free all summer. It was a shock. And so I spent it in this town with my family, and every day I went to the library and I started working on this book, and no one knew that I was writing a book. I hadn't told anyone I was writing a book. And that was unusual for me because one side effect of becoming kind of visible as a writer, as what happened with a series of unfortunate events, is that people just start saying, well, what are you working on next? And a publisher will say, oh, will it come this year? When will it come? And so people start to know kind of what you're doing. And this time, because everyone thought that I was going to spend the summer working very hard and not talking to them, everyone left me alone. No one knew what I was doing. And it felt very magical. And I didn't even know if it could become a book. I didn't know if it was really sensible enough to be a book. But it was great fun writing. And then when it was done, I put it away for a little bit, and then I came back to it and I said, I think it is a book. And that was a marvelous time.
So without spoiling anything, of course, but the whole novel starts with Lemony Snicket receiving a letter that confirms that he's just had poison for breakfast, hence the title. Are you then in some sort of vein following in the footsteps of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and trying to get rid of your most famous creation?
I don't think so. I think that all of the Lemony Snicket books think about death a lot.
Yeah.
And certainly the narrator of Lemony Snicket thinks about death a lot. And so it made sense to me to write a book where he was really thinking about his own death. And as you say, we won't give away the ending, I guess. But But no, I don't. I think I don't know that much about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but I think he really grew to hate Sherlock Holmes. Yeah. And I do not hate Lemony Snicket. We get along pretty well. Me and Lemony Snicket get along pretty well.
Good to hear. Well, I won't necessarily ask if there will be any further in Lemony Snicket books, but because that will give it the ending of this one. But what has been the most satisfying part of working on this novel in particular?
I don't know. I think if you're, for me anyway, writing is not, it's not a part of satisfaction. In fact, you want to be a little bit dissatisfied all the time. I think if I were ever completely satisfied with something that I was doing, then I might not ever do anything again. But it was delicious to write that first draft at a time when no one knew I was writing a book. And then I do, whenever I write a book, now I put it away for at least 6 months. I try to put it away for a year. I used to put it away in my refrigerator, in the crisper. I don't know what the word is in Norwegian. In fact, I don't know what hardly any words are in Norwegian. But the crisper is like the drawer in the refrigerator where you keep vegetables. And I would put it there because another writer told me that they put their manuscripts there in case the house burns down, that it won't burn. And I don't know if that's true. And then I had an argument with my wife about whether the crisper drawer is for vegetables or whether it is for manuscripts. And at the end of this argument, I was given a gift by my wife, which is a fireproof box. So now I keep my manuscripts in a fireproof box in a closet. And sometimes when I take out the manuscript, it is a mess. It is definitely not a book. And this time it was a mess, but I could see that it really was a book. So that was fairly satisfying. Finding a good illustrator was satisfying. It's my first book with a different publisher, so working with a new editor and a new publisher was really satisfying. And then usually I travel a lot when a book comes out, and obviously the state the world is in, I traveled a lot less, but I did get to go some places, and that was satisfying too, particularly because it had been so long since anyone had done any traveling, and it was nice to go someplace and then to feel that people wanted to come talk to me, even after such a long time of not doing anything. That felt nice. So all of that, but I don't know if satisfying, I like to be dissatisfied. I like to kind of stay hungry artistically and to think, oh, next time it will be better. That's a better feeling for me. I think a book is at its best when it is entirely imaginary because nothing has gone wrong. You know, and so you have a vision of a book and you think, oh, well, this one is going to be so elegant. It's going to give me no problem whatsoever. And it's just going to be perfectly fashioned. Nothing is going to go wrong with it. And then as soon as you start to write the first draft, you begin to think, oh, this is pretty shabby, but I'll make it better. And then at least in my case, you never really, it isn't that you reach a state of perfection. It's that you say, I don't think I can make it any better than I've already made it. Which is not the same as thinking that it's perfect at all, but you think this is the best I can do, and that's a fairly sad journey from that first idea where it's perfect and magical to the actuality. But it's like anything else, right? It's like a perfect day that you try to plan, and even if it's a wonderful day, you think, oh, but if I really, really look at it, there's something that could have gone better, and so. I'm trying to think. When I was younger, I had this, I still have it someplace. I had an album by Sonic Youth, and on the side it said, once the music leaves your head, it's already compromised. Yeah. And I thought that was very well put.
Yeah. Well, then going back to going a bit further back in how you got to where you are today, I have heard somewhere, might be completely false because I heard it on the internet, so you never know.
That's probably false.
Yeah, but I've heard somewhere you devoted your childhood to taxidermy and playing the harpsichord. So what made you then give up on those lofty dreams to become a writer instead?
Well, I think that was Lemony Snicket's childhood. But when I was a child, I knew a child who was learning taxidermy. And I thought that was I didn't know that was, first of all, I thought that taxidermy had been stopped a long time ago. But no one ever did it. And so that was really shocking. And then I did actually have some neighbors who not only played the harpsichord, but they bought a harpsichord kit, and they spent years making this harpsichord. And, the harpsichord is, it's intellectually fascinating to me, but I don't like to listen to it very often, because one of the things of the harpsichord, and this feels metaphorical somehow, is that it's not sensitive to pressure. So everything on the harpsichord is the same volume. You can't play something loud on the harpsichord and something short on the harpsichord. You can't play, this part needs to be louder, and this. It doesn't work that way at all. And some people are like that, but I never knew a musical instrument that was like that. But you think of the basics of a musical instrument is that you can play it louder and softer. That's the basic. But you can't on a harpsichord. So I did find the harpsichord. I found both those things pretty fascinating in my childhood, taxidermy and the harpsichord. So I think when I wrote some lines someplace about Lemony Snicket's childhood, I thought taxidermy and the harpsichord were things to do.
Yeah. And growing up, literature was also a big part of your upbringing. I'm imagining, at least, because your sister is a writer as well.
Yes, her first novel came out this past year. Yes.
Yeah. So it was kind of not predetermined, of course, but in your blood, let's say, that you were supposed to do something in the creative writing field.
I guess so. My parents are not artists, but they have a great appreciation for literature and music. I have a distant relative, Hugh Walpole, who is a fairly well-known British writer, but I don't think it doesn't seem reasonable to say it would be anything that would be in genetics anyway. But I certainly grew up in a house that had lots of books to read, and we went to the library all the time. And I think my parents did a very good job with both of their children of just throwing things at the children to see if they liked them. And literature really, really stuck for me. And so I didn't always think that I would be able to be a writer, but I always knew that I wanted some relationship with literature in my life. And it's funny to say that now, because I'm at my desk, and this is I have about 6 piles of books on my desk, and this is just one of full of Post-its from notes that I'm making. So I've gone completely bonkers, completely crazy with literature. I can't show you the rest of the piles because they're behind the computer, but I always have a book on hand. A friend of mine just laughed at me because I met him for a drink and I was late. And the reason why I was late is because I couldn't decide which book to bring in case I was early. If I were early, I would have read a book, but I wasted all the time that I would have been early looking for the book to bring. So I came and I said, "I'm sorry, I'm late. I was choosing a book." And he said, "Why were you choosing a book?" And I said, "Well, because I thought I was going to get here early." And as it came out of my mouth, I realized what deep nonsense I was saying. It was quite startling.
I always thought I was the only one who thought like that, but it's nice to know I have a kindred spirit across the Atlantic.
I think there's quite a network of people who have that relationship with literature. Yeah. And I think that it's more noticeable because it's harder to hide. Yeah. I think if you have a visual aesthetic, it means your home is beautiful, or you pay a lot of attention to what you're wearing, and that fits in more with everybody else. You might think, "Oh, look, she always looks great," or "He has a beautiful house," but you don't understand it. I think if the musical arts are what do, you might go and play music some places, and then you have music on. But again, there's music on almost everywhere you go, and so you notice it less. But if you're obsessed with literature, you're holding a book, which becomes It's an analog thing, right? It's not the small object most people are holding all the time.
No.
It's a digital small object most people are holding. And so I think it's more noticeable. It's the same that if you love to drink water, no one notices. But if you love to eat lobster, if you're constantly eating lobster, someone would notice.
Yeah. I guess that also applies to if you're playing the harpsichord, but you're bound to notice at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. Right. My neighbors had all kinds of things growing up, but what I remember is the harpsichord kit. It seems so exhausting to spend all that time together putting a harpsichord, and then at the end of it, you only have a harpsichord. It's not very impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's impressive, but it's not sensible. What are you going to do all day? Just sit and play the harpsichord in your house, and you can't take it anywhere.
No.
You're just stuck at home lonely with a harpsichord.
Yeah. It's a bit sad, really.
It is. It is. Yeah. It's melancholy.
Yeah. That will also be a great epithet if someone were to pass away. They're survived by their favorite harpsichord.
Right. Or you could be buried in it if you were little enough.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't think I could be buried in a harpsichord, but some people I know could.
Yeah. I couldn't either, to be honest, but I'll give it a go. That would probably be the death of me trying to fit into a harpsichord. But I'm going on a tangent here.
So you would do it before you died.
Yeah.
They would say he's really looking grim today. Let's put him in the harpsichord. Yeah. Oh, look, he's dead. Perfect. Bury the harpsichord.
Yeah,
remove the legs. They should remove the legs of the harpsichord before burying it. Then you use a narrower hole.
Well, we ask the big questions in this podcast. Yeah.
No, I'm glad. I'm glad goats and the harpsichord are the core of what we're discussing today. That feels worthy.
Yeah. That's also does wonders for my ego, knowing I have one of my biggest heroes on my podcast. I spent 20 minutes talking about goats and harpsichords, but oh well.
The stuff of life. That's okay.
Yeah. It's also a way to get to know you better without asking the same standard questions all the time. Yeah. So I try at least to be a bit original, if nothing else.
Yeah, conversation is tricky. I interview a lot of other writers. I used to do more. I do a little now, but I used to do more work for magazines. And there's a lecture series here where they ask different people to interview people, and I enjoyed interviewing people on the radio and things like that. And but I've learned that conversation is actually tricky. You never know what is going to open up a vein of conversation. So you have to keep everything. You have to have what you've decided to ask, and then you have to be able to abandon it. Yeah, which is tough. It's a tough balance.
Yeah. I usually tell all my guests before we start recording that if you want to go down the rabbit hole, I'll try to follow you rather than keep bombarding you with questions. But that's also a literary reference that some people don't get. So I spend most of the time trying to teach them what I mean about the rabbit hole, and then my time is up. Yeah.
Does Lewis Carroll have? I guess it would be natural that Lewis Carroll has less of a presence in Norway. Yeah. That's not surprising, really.
But Alice in Wonderland is, well, at least a Disney movie is very big here when I was a kid. So yeah.
But I think that's one of those things. I like thinking about this, actually. I think there's certain types of literary influence that are so enormous that you forget it's literary, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Right? I always think when so many people say Kafka-esque, more people say Kafka-esque than have read Kafka.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to never have read Kafka, and you still say, oh, this experience is Kafka-esque. Yeah. And that's interesting to me.
But then how would you know if the situation is Kafka-esque if you haven't read Kafka?
Right, because you've learned it without knowing where it's from.
Yeah.
And I think that for instance, that people assume that many Hans Christian Andersen stories are collected the way the Grimm brothers collected, but Andersen made them all up, which is really more interesting, or not more interesting, but it's more remarkable that he made up these stories that are beloved so much, as opposed to collecting them where they had developed into stories from generations and generations, as the Brothers Grimm did, or many other people did. And he's an example that he has this enormous literary influence, but people forget it's literary. They just say the Ugly Duckling. Everyone knows the Ugly Duckling. And you think that's just some story that everyone knows, but it was written by a man.
Yeah. To stay on literary topics and
stay on whatever it is that we're talking about.
Yeah. I read somewhere, and I also feel I noticed that in your writing that you at least early on very inspired by Roald Dahl.
Yeah. I would say, actually, when I was young, that his work was another example of something that I didn't think about with an author, particularly Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I thought Charlie and the Chocolate Factory was like some old tale that everyone knew. And he also, my favorite book of his, which is less popular, and I've never understood why, but it's called Danny, the Champion of the World. Yeah. And it starts by saying, this is a picture of me when I was little. And there's a photograph in the book. And then the rest of the story goes on, and it's a fairly wild adventure. And I think that's a very Snicket moment for me, because there was this photograph that felt real. And you think, I guess this whole story is real. But then you knew it was written by another person, Roald Dahl. His name isn't Danny. And so the whole thing was really strange. But I remember I loved that opening with the photograph. That was so powerful to me. And I never, it took me a while to understand that, in fact, it wasn't either real or fake. But in fact, that is an old picture of Roald Dahl, but he just put it in there because he thought it would be fun, and he thought it would anchor the story. And so I think that was a big influence. But also his, most of his books have this narrator who will say, you know, you and I would never do this, but now this character did this. And I liked that too. I liked the sense that the story was being told by someone. I think that's a powerful feeling. I think when you're young, you know, probably the first books that you do, someone's reading to you, right? You're very young and someone's reading them to you. And so you're used to that. And if you're being, I mean, my parents would always interrupt what they were reading to me to make some editorial comment. So that became part of the experience of reading, right? When you read a picture book to a child, you might often say, oh, look at that over there, you know, which is not what the text is saying. And so you have this very fluid experience. And so I think when I was old enough to read by myself, I still liked the sense that someone was telling me a story that felt comforting to me. I also feel, at least the first time I read your series of unfortunate events, feeling being a slightly insecure, bullied kid, knowing that at least I had Lemony Snicket on my side. He looked after me, although he did say that if I wanted a happy ending, I should read something else.
If you are interested in stories with happy endings, you would be better off reading some other book. In this book, not only is there no happy ending, there is no happy beginning, and very few happy things in the middle.
I felt like an active part in not just reading it, but also living the story, if that makes sense. Yeah,
I think I'm glad you said that, and I'm sorry you were bullied, of course. No. But I think that for me, the character of Lemony Snicket has always felt like that kind of friend that you want when you're feeling lonely and down, who has like an adventure he wants to take you on and all kinds of things to show you. And, you know, something interesting, more interesting than the drudgery of the everyday loneliness and terror that is most of childhood. So I always liked that idea. He was someone, you know, you wanted someone like that to show up, figure of authority, but who was also really fun. Yeah. You know, who had something to take you. And the idea that they would say, like, you need to come with me right now. There's a conspiracy. We need your help. And there's so much of children's literature has that in it. has this, I'm having an everyday life, and then there's a crisis going on that I don't really understand, but I'm the only one who can come and fix it. And I think that's from that fantasy of when you're lonely, that you want someone to take you out of your loneliness to a more interesting place.
Yeah. And I also remember my first reading of those books were in Norwegian, but then naturally evolving into wanting to read it in the original language. And like I said in the introduction, that made me fall in love with language and the way you can create the words with just a few sentences that really fueled my imagination.
Thank you.
The series of events has been sold over 60 million copies and been translated to over 41 languages. So do you ever get that moment from readers where you think, well, that somehow it's been lost in translation here?
Well, English is the only language I can read in. Okay. And so I don't have any direct experience of it being lost in translation, but I often can't. I mean, I think the idea of translation is so strange in literature, because so much literature that I love came to me through other languages and came to me through translators. But on the other hand, how can I know that that is really what I love? How can I know what I love about it? Because it's the word. Books are made of words. So if I don't really have the right words, how can I have them? Yeah. And every so often a translator will write to me and ask me some question. You know, they'll say, are you trying to make this kind of joke, or is this a reference? And oftentimes I think, this is the first time I've been asked this, and this book has been translated all over the world. Yeah. And then, you know, and it's finally one person, the Arabic translator or the Finnish translator or something, will say, I have this question for you. And I'll think, no one has asked this. How did they do it without asking these questions? So yeah, I do. I mean, fear is big, but I mean, I think there must be the knowledge that the experience of reading it in other languages is obviously something else. Yeah. And, but that's, in some sense, I think when you're writing, you know that you can't control the experience of the reader, right? That they'll say, you know, they'll read for a while and they'll be like, and now I want to do something else. And you'll think, but I worked hard. Don't you want to keep reading it? And they'll say, maybe in a minute I'll read it. This is my livelihood. Yeah. And so I think that's something that you have to get used to right away when you're writing, is knowing that the experience that a reader has is almost entirely invisible to you. I mean, I'm lucky enough that I have enough readers that I hear from some of them. Most people will literally never hear from a reader. Oh. And so I think that's a curious experience, and it's something that you have to get used to. But it's also something that, because if you're writing, you're also a reader. And so, you know, right? We say this to people all the time. Oh, you know, I think the book was good, but I just wasn't in the mood for it. You know, or this book has a tall mother, and I had a tall mother, so I loved it, but I don't really know. I don't know if the book's really good or if it's just my thing. People talk about books like that all the time, and so you just have to resign yourself that that's going to be something that you're that you don't know if it'll be, that you can't control. Mm-hmm.
One thing that often happens when other intellectual property gets well known and popular around the world is that it's usually firstly translated into other languages, but then also turned into movies or TV shows. Yeah. In your case, both, being the Nickelodeon movie with Jim Carrey and, of course, the Netflix show with Neil Patrick Harris, both playing Count Olaf. Won't necessarily force you to go into specifics or favoritism or anything like that, but on a general level, which version or which universe, so to speak, did you feel edged closer to your original image of what the world should look like?
I mean, honestly, what I think is that I'm not sure that's the job of the film or the TV. I mean, certainly the Netflix show adopted all 13 books, so that was going to be it's going to be a larger and more complete vision than the film. But I mean, for me, the first interpretation of that way was Brett Hellquist's illustrations. Right? He drew the Baudelaires. He drew Count Olaf for the first time. They're described, I mean, Count Olaf in particular is described, but the Baudelaires are hardly described at all. So a lot of what Brett did was take a text and already interpret it. And his illustrations are by far the most common for a series of unfortunate events, but they're not the only ones. A few publishers hired other illustrators who did other things. And that was always interesting to see. And of course, I get many, many drawings that people send me. I was going to say children, but now many adults send me their drawings of something. And I always love seeing that too. And particularly in the case of the Baudelaires, I tried not to describe them so that anyone could imagine themselves in that world, rather than say they looked like this. So you would say, "Oh, that isn't me." That you could say, "Oh, that is me," because I think I look like Klaus, because the only thing you know about Klaus is that he wore glasses, or the only thing you know about Violet is that she'd put her hair up. And so I like that interpretation. I like seeing what people will do. And so it's the same with the movie and the TV show. It's the same with, I've seen all kinds of little theater adaptations, or something that, someone will put up a little YouTube of them acting up a scene or something like that. And sometimes I'll see that. I like seeing all of that. I'm just interested in it. And so I don't think of myself as having a specific vision, and if Netflix didn't get it right, it's not good. It was more that I was curious what they were going to do. And so I did some work on the scripts for both of those, for the movie and for the TV show too. And I was fired from both of them. And so it was more that my vision was incompatible with their vision, less that their vision was incompatible with mine. And sometimes that was really hard too. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm always easygoing on this, but I think in the long run, it isn't that I have a vision in my head that they have to do. It's that I'm curious to see what their vision is and how they would do it.
Naturally, you get a lot more time to develop characters and the world building through a TV series with 3 seasons, as opposed to a movie with a runtime of 90 minutes. And both have pros and cons, I'm sure, but you being involved in the process, at least to begin with, and then later on watching it, do you are you able to watch it as an objective viewer, or are you no?
I mean, for one thing, when you're involved in the making of it, you see many, many versions. You see a rough cut, you see a weird edit, you see, oh, we're going to try this thing. And so you see all these different versions. A few years ago, I was at a literary festival, and there was a panel on film adaptations, and they showed a scene from each person's film. And so they showed a scene from the Lemony Snicket movie, which I hadn't seen since it was open. I hadn't seen in years. And I totally forgot that the scene that they showed me was in the film. I could have sworn that we edited it out. And so I don't even have a grip on what is in actually every episode of the Netflix show, because I saw so many things that we filmed, and we tried so many things, and I forget, and things like that. And so I can't even be an objective viewer in terms of what the content is, let alone what I think of it. And mostly what I liked, what I was hoping to hear, and I know that Netflix was hoping for this too, was that I like to hear from families who said, we all watch it together and we're having a great time. Because I have a family and I know what that's like. You love something and you make a meal and you're on the sofa watching it, you're having a good time. That's a fun thing. And I liked hearing that was what the experience was. Particularly because there's so much television now, and I hate to think of the lonely television that so many people watch by themselves. And they're just watching it. They don't really love it. They're just kind of like it. And I think the whole point of moving television to the world of streaming and on demand is so that you can watch it with people, so you can have this experience. So that's what I liked hearing most, was people's experiences. It's really, I'm not that interested in what I think of the adaptation, because as we said, once the music leaves your head, it's already compromised. I already had an idea. I had it a long time ago, and I wrote it a long time ago too. And so what other people are doing is interesting to me, but I don't think I'm the person that people should please. And that is also what Paramount Pictures and what Nickelodeon and what Netflix thought. They also didn't think I was the person to please. So it's good. In that we were in agreement.
Yeah. Spørsmålet fra lytterne. Mimi wants to know who, if any, living character is Count Olaf based on?
Oh, I mean, we all know cruel people, don't we?
Yeah.
And we all know cruel people who enjoy being cruel. So I think I think the character of Count Olaf probably resembles the most people in the world out of all the characters. Because, so, I didn't base him on any specific cruel person, but I just have, experienced cruelty in my life, as everyone has. And so that's where it came from.
Yeah.
Joyful cruelty. Someone who enjoys being cruel. That's what it came from.
Yeah. Also noticed that reading it as a kid, I thought of one of my teachers as Count Olaf, and now as an adult, I think of someone very different, based on what I've also been through as I've gotten older. So I think I find it interesting that the same character revisited a few years later could seem completely different.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Second question from Mimi. Given what the three Baudelaire orphans has to go through your series of books, how was your childhood? And do you is this some sort of repentance or something you have to get out?
No, I mean, obviously my childhood was less eventful than that of Baudelaire's. It would almost have to be. I don't think anyone who experienced what the Baudelaires have felt would have would have enough stability to sit around and be an adult writing.
Yeah.
But I come from a family that fled Nazism in the late 30s. So many family members were unknown to me, were lost to me because of that. I grew up in a large city that was full of everyone's stories of immigration and or otherwise coming to America, and sometimes specifically to San Francisco for sanctuary because of what they looked like or how they worshipped or who they loved. So I think thinking about all those experiences was part of it. And then all of the literature that I liked best when I was young, what had melodramatic things happening in it. Yeah. Some people liked books where, two children have a perfectly average time and everything happens. I didn't like that. I liked dragons attacking or, a house being haunted or anything like that. And in fact, the most famous book by Baudelaire, The Flowers of Evil, is a book that I read when I was 12 years old for the first time. And I took it from the library because it sounded like a novel where terrible things were happening, The Flowers of Evil. That's, and I thought, oh, this is going to be great. And I took it home and it was not what I expected, but I was always drawn to that kind of melodrama.
The last listener question is a bit of a long one, but I'll try to skim through it. Agneta says here, quote, a series of unfortunate events always felt like it had fate at its audience. As a writer, you seem to assume that children could be clever and attentive readers capable of appreciating complex and dark storylines that didn't necessarily offer clear answers or happy endings. There were also some unusual and excellent stylistic choices made with regards to literary devices, formatting, and having an ongoing meta narrative. Was this ever met with resistance, and did you have any difficulties in finding a publisher willing to give it a chance?
I didn't. I got very lucky in terms of a publisher because it was at a time, my first American publisher for the Snicket books was HarperCollins. And during that time, they were trying to publish way more books than they had been publishing. And so I was working with a new editor. We were both young then, and with not much money. They didn't pay very much money up front for it. And so as long as it wasn't, child pornography or something, they didn't really care. Yeah. They just thought, best of luck to you. We don't know if this will work. We'll see if it works. And so they weren't that concerned with the content. We're in a more conservative time now. There was much more talk. There was much more concern about Poison for Breakfast than there ever was for A Series of Unfortunate Events, which is funny because Poison for Breakfast is mostly philosophical musings, and A Series of Unfortunate Events is mostly terrible things happening to children over and over again. Yeah, which in my mind is if you're going to measure danger of literature, which is I think ridiculous anyway, but if you're going to measure danger, that's going to be more dangerous. But at the time, no one was that concerned with it, and I think that I think that was a blessing, and I think that. You see that in the history of art making in general, that when you leave artists more or less alone, they do more interesting work than if the people publishing them were in constant consult about the content. And now that doesn't happen. Now it's always a conversation. Even if you've already proven yourself supposedly to be good at it, there's still very long, tedious conversations about, I don't know if people are up for this. And I think it's tiresome, extremely tiresome.
Yeah. Time is rapidly running out. I just have a few questions to wrap things up before I let you go. Given, like you mentioned, we're living in a more conservative time now. Given that, do you ever think you would have been able to write a series of unfortunate events today?
I have definitely thought it. I mean, it's a thought experiment, so I don't know how it would go, but. I see in America, at least, much more concern about content of children's literature now. It's a much more conservative time. And I have many friends who are in children's literature, writing and illustrating, and they're all very concerned. And I think that there's still many, many wonderful books being published, but I think that overall it's a chill on the industry. And it's a chill on the writers, because there used to be kind of a deal in place for American children's literature, which was that you were not necessarily paid very well. You were not considered a real author by so many institutions, but you got to have this fun. You got to do these things and have this fun. And now to begin to take that away means that more artists are going to say, why would I want to do this? Yeah. I don't get the respect of being a serious artist, and I'm not getting any money. So if also I have to argue with you all the time about whether or not something's appropriate, I don't know what it is. And so it's sad for me, because when I started in children's literature, I was really welcomed by a wonderful community of other artists. And now I try to do that. I try to talk to younger artists who are coming up, and a lot of them are really being exhausted by the process of talking about that content, and a lot of them don't want to do it anymore. Yeah. And that makes me sad.
Yeah. I was going to ask a different question, but I don't know how to follow up from that, because I don't want to make light of it either.
Yeah.
So I think don't have any other choice than to just carry on and hope for the best here.
Sure.
Because out of context, this will sound really strange and possibly disturbing.
Okay.
But regarding the start, your beginning publishing the first few novels in a series of unfortunate events, are you partly responsible for ending the life of Edward Corey?
I like to think that I am.
Yeah.
But I don't have any proof. But when the first 2 volumes were published, I sent them to Edward Gorey with a note saying how much I admired his work and how I hoped that he forgave everything that I stole from his work, because I really did. And he died soon after, and I never heard back from him. And so I like to think that I killed him. I like to imagine that he looked and he said, oh my goodness, someone has plundered my own imagination. And he knocked his brandy over, he stood up from his chair, and he dropped dead. But I'm pretty sure there's nobody who has ever told me that that is the case. And I'm happy to say that his home in Massachusetts has become a very charming museum. They've really done an excellent job of it. And I've been there many times, and I've met, it's being cared for by people who knew him well, and none of them have ever said, look, it's the man who murdered Edward Gorey, get him out of here. So I think, even though in my fantasy I am responsible, I think I have to accept that maybe Edward Gorey died all by himself and that I didn't help him.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Oh, well.
You win some, you lose some.
Yeah. I just like the romantic imagining of him just standing up and say, shouting, this is preposterous, and then just keeling over. And
but he's a real inspiration, and even his house is an inspiration. One of the things in his house, he used to go down to this diner. He used to walk to the diner every day and have the same lunch, and they took his receipts from the diner, a month of them, and they framed them and gave it to him as a birthday present. And that's up there. And it's inspiring when you think about being an artist, because he had a certain routine that he followed, and that obviously gave wind to it. But he's really inspiring. I like thinking about him. I'm grateful to talk about him.
Yeah. Circling back to Roald Dahl, his house or his museum is also filled with artifacts that he surrounded himself with during his writing process. Among other things, his old replaced hip bone, I think, or his knee. I'm not sure.
I haven't been to his house. Yeah.
Oh.
I know that it's full of weird things, but I would like to go someday, but I haven't been.
Yeah. So if there is ever a Lemony Snicket / Daniel Handler museum, what sort of items are you most hoping that the hordes of German and Japanese tourists will stop and gawk at?
I mean, I assume I'll be dead. Otherwise, I would like to.
Sure.
I don't know. I mean, I've thought about this because I've done a big project with the rebuilding of the Hans Christian Andersen Museum, and the Hans Christian Andersen Museum in Odense was not. They wanted to change the concept of a museum for a writer. That instead of saying, this is his pen and this is his desk and here's a photograph of where he used to live, that instead they would try to create the experience of being immersed in his literature. Because that's, of course, the real legacy, right? That's why you're visiting. You don't go to Roald Dahl's house because you like to see an object. You go to Roald Dahl's house because you like the world of Roald Dahl. And so... I haven't thought about it in terms of my own museum, but I've thought about it. But I've thought about that experience of because I don't like to go to, generally I don't like a literary museum because it doesn't give me what I want from it, which is to try to feel like you're in the presence of that artist. Instead, it feels like a biography, except it's up on the walls. So I don't know, but I'll show you just because it's a strange object. And I know this is the podcast, but someone found this in the street and they gave it to me, which is, it's a small, I think it's supposed to be a bookend. It's a small statue of someone reading, and they're leaning up against a big bookshelf, but the head came off. And so it's a headless person reading, and so they thought it ought to belong to me. This wouldn't be bad, I think. If you had this in the corner of the museum, that would be of some interest to someone. But my wife hates it, and so I actually think the museum would have to move quickly, because probably the moment I die, she would say, "Thank goodness I can finally throw this out." So now whoever's planning the museum knows that they have to move quick.
Now you know, and just put some emotional blackmail on your wife, if I may. You could just say that this bookend is really a sculpture of Edward Gorey. Then it has sentimental value to.
Yeah, well, it looks like it could be a sculpture of Lemony Snicket because the face is gone. Yeah, that's what it looks like. But my wife is unmoved by such things. That won't work. Yeah.
I tried.
Yeah, nice try.
Yep. In closing, what is the one thing in the feedback you've gotten from readers throughout the years? What is the one thing you've never heard that you hope that someone would notice in your books? Like some secret little detail.
I do have them, I will say. My pause is not because I can't think of one. My pause is because I'm reluctant to tell them. Yeah. Because I don't like... I like when my readers are their own archaeologists and they go and find me things. And sometimes they find me things that I've put there. And sometimes they find me things that I forgot I put there. And sometimes they find me things that I don't put there. So there are things that I'm hoping someday someone will say. But I don't want to say them. I want them to find them for me.
Yeah. There you go, people. Just keep searching.
That's right.
Yeah. Daniel Handler, should I say Lemony Snicket? It's been a great pleasure having you as a guest on my podcast.
I appreciate your thoughtful questions. This has been a delight.
Well, that's great to hear. I never want to waste your time, so I thought I might as well try to ask you some proper questions. Besides goats and harpsichords.
What else is there to discuss, really, except the objects we think of and how we remember them?
Yeah.
It's the whole literary project.
Du har hørt på en episode av Portrettpodden, en podcast med meg, Mats Lasse-Jangås, og min gjest i denne episoden var selveste Lemony Snicket. Min takk til Lemony, eller Daniel som han egentlig heter, for at han tok seg tid til å stille opp i denne episoden. Har du gjort deg noen tanker mens du har hørt på? Har du ris eller ros eller tips som skal komme, kan du rette til Portrettpodden sine Facebook-sider, eller på e-post til portrettpodden@gmail.com. Alle lydklippene i denne episoden benyttet i henhold til sitatrett. Portrettpodden arbeider i henhold til Vær varsom-plakatens regler for god presseskikk. Takk for at nettopp du hørte på, og vi høres snart igjen.